Hello and welcome back to the Summer Day Studios YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at how you can render clouds in Maya with Arnold. So today we're going to look at one very specific way that you can do this quite realistically and in a very nice, pleasing visual way. If you've never done this before, it's actually really simple, and this video probably won't be that long. We're going to take a look at how you can set them up, create the material for them, and then some setbacks that you might encounter while rendering them, since they can be really heavy if you've not done this before. So there's actually a couple different ways of making clouds in 3D, and these have changed over time with the development of new software and techniques. So quite an old school way that is still done from time to time and can look good is to actually model the shape of the cloud and then use a mixture of displacement techniques to create a kind of quick cloud-like shape. But that can potentially create really dense meshes and isn't always great to use, especially if you're planning on having lots of different clouds. The next best way to create clouds is to essentially use a volume. So what is a volume? It's basically a special type of 3D object, like a container, that you can use to create effects like clouds, smoke, fog, and fire, and they all exist within that container. Unlike regular models that you have like an actual modeled surface with polygons, volumes contain density data instead of polys. You can then add shaders to these so that light can pass through and interact with them in the same way that it would in real life. Today we're going to be using something called the Arnold volume, which is used to render this data, this volumetric data in Arnold. This is especially useful for something like clouds because they aren't actually solid objects like a normal model, right? The reason why it's better to use a volume as opposed to a model is because volumes allow you to actually render things with soft edges that kind of taper off, right? Like a cloud, they're not super solid. Some of them do look a little bit more solid, but you also get quite wispy looking clouds where they sort of seem to blend into the sky. That sort of thing is much harder to do with a modeled surface and just shaders alone. So that's why we're going to use a volume, and it works better. So once you're in Maya, to get started, we're going to go over to the Arnold tab at the top, and there's a few different buttons here, but we're looking for the volume button here, which is kind of like this cube with this wavy pattern on it. And when you create it, you'll see here that it really does just look like a container. It almost looks like you're looking at a cube with the wireframe turned on. This is kind of like the container or bounding box for your simulation, in this case clouds today, and they will exist purely within this box. You can scale it up, you can rotate it, and more importantly, you can move it around much in the same way that you would just a model in Maya as well. So the volume on its own doesn't actually do anything. It's just a container that you can put information or data into. There are a few different ways to do that, but today we're going to be using something called a VDB file. Now, a VDB file, you've probably never heard of that before. I also didn't until a couple years ago. It's essentially a file format that just stores volumetric data like density for the shapes of clouds or smoke or fog, explosions, all of that cool effects stuff, instead of actual like polygonal data. So essentially all this is giving Maya and Arnold is just density information, especially once we connect up our VDB file. So we're going to be using pre-made VDB files specifically for clouds. So that file will contain all of the data to create a certain cloud shape. We're not going to be making our own clouds, our own VDB files today, and the reason for that is because that's very technical. You'd need to use a tool like Bifrost within Maya or Houdini, or it can also be done in Blender and other bits of software as well. And for the scope of this tutorial, that's not what we're going to be going over. I'm just going to be showing you how to use these files, which you can get many of them for free, to actually render clouds for your scenes. A lot of artists really will choose to use pre-made VDBs just because it's quicker and it allows you to focus on lighting, shading, and rendering without actually needing to build up that kind of complex technical workflow of actually creating the clouds to yourself. So where exactly can you get VDB files from the internet? So there are many that you can pay for, and there are some good ones out there, but I'm not going to be looking at that today because this is just for this tutorial and I want to show you a bunch of free ones. Conveniently, one of the best ones you can get, unfortunately it is just a single cloud, but it's from the Walt Disney Company. They provide it free of charge online. You can go ahead and download that. That's the one I'm going to be using for today's video. There's also a bunch on CG Trader that you can get for free, like this one. On this website as well, Django FX, they have a bunch of free VDBs as well for fire and smoke, but also clouds, like this example. There's also many on Gumroad as well that you can get. They kind of vary in quality, but I'll provide all four of these links in the description for you to get and follow along. Any VDB you get will work the same way. Your cloud just might look different to what mine looks like, unless you want to download the same Disney one. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded the Disney VDB, which I've just stored in a folder here. They can be quite large. For example, this one is a quarter resolution of the main version, and that's still 66 megabytes. The main file was a gigabyte. So these can get really intense, so just be aware of that when you're connecting these up. with your VDBs downloaded, I'm going to go over to the file name section of the attribute editor. I'm going to click on this little file icon and then just navigate to where the VDB is. And I'm going to pick the 8 one just for the time being, so this renders nice and quick to demonstrate. You'll probably notice that your volume has massively increased in size, and that's because it's designed to match the size of the VDB data that you've used. You can, of course, scale that down to whatever size you like, but just bear in mind it might explode in size a little bit, and you'll have to adjust it to whatever size your scene is. So how can we actually go about rendering this now we've connected the VDB? Well, the best light to use would be an HDRI, but for the time being, I'm just going to use a directional light so that we can quickly see what this looks like. Directional lights kind of just mimic the sun anyway, so this can work for us. We'll put a bit of an angle on it, and then we'll just go ahead and render. So you can see we're getting the shape of our cloud, but right now it's very, very dark. So let's go ahead and increase the exposure of our light. But you can see now we're getting cloud data, okay? So the VDB is providing all of this volumetric data and it's being rendered within our volume. You can see it's nicely contained within this square. If I were to go ahead and scale this down, the scale changes. We can move it from left to right, up and down, whatever you want to do. You can also rotate it if you like, though clouds generally are going to have the flat bit on the bottom, right? So try and keep that in mind. One thing you may have noticed is that the cloud doesn't really look particularly transparent or see-through. We're not getting that kind of light scattering. It almost looks like a solid kind of lump of cauliflower or something. It's not really working for us, and that's because we need to change a few things before this can actually look like a real nice cloud. So we need to go up to the render settings. We're going to click this little film clacker thing up here with the cog icon. We're going to come to the Arnold render tab, and then under ray depth, by default, the volume is set to 0, which means that we're not going to be getting any volumetric whatsoever. Kind of important for clouds, we need some volume. So just for testing, I always like just to set this to 1 so that we actually have something for Maya to render with. Next, what we're going to do is I'm going to hold down right click. I'm actually going to go ahead and assign a new material. Because we need to apply a shader to this. It doesn't just work as is, and this will allow you to control certain things. So I'm just going to use an AI standard surface for the time being, and your cloud might disappear. Don't worry about that. That is normal. We can then open up the Hypershade editor and wait for that to load, and then we're just going to graph in our new material that we made. Then after that, I'm going to press tab, and I'm just going to type in volume, and we are looking for the AI standard volume material. So the way Arnold does this is a bit weird. The volume shader essentially just connects into the standard volume rather than working on its own. I don't know why they decided to do it like that. That's just how it works. We're going to take the out color and we're going to plug that into the volume. Okay. Now, if we come back to Maya, you'll be able to see your lovely cloud again, and it will look mostly the same. Nothing will have changed yet. So now that we've made those adjustments to the volumetric settings, we can go ahead and start tweaking our volume shader now that this is connected. So there's a few different things we can adjust here. This might look quite similar to other materials that you've used in the past, but it works a little differently in that this is going to adjust the transparency, color, and density of your cloud. So one of the first things I always like to change is adjusting the density, because sometimes 1 is not going to be a good value for your cloud. You can really get this quite low. If I was to reduce this to 0.1, you can see already it's making the cloud look a hell of a lot fluffier. One thing you may have noticed as well is even at this lower resolution with only 1 volume ray depth, the render times are already, you know, it's not really long, but 14 seconds just to render this one cloud with a basic light. You can see how this could start to get quite heavy. But now this is fully rendered, you can see reducing the density to something like 0.1 has made this cloud look a lot fluffier, a lot lighter, a lot less dense, kind of more like a normal cloud, maybe not like a storm cloud so much. You can also adjust the transparency as well. By default, it's got kind of a mid-range up here. Increasing the weights this far up has made the cloud now look very, very light. One of the downsides of this, though, is that the higher you raise the transparency, the lower you raise the density, you're getting less detail in that cloud. So you can see now that we're losing a lot of the volume of the cloud now. It looks like a lot flatter. So generally, if you're going to, if you want a lighter looking cloud, I prefer to adjust the density as opposed to the transparency, just because I think the effect looks a little bit more realistic, a little bit more appealing. You can also go ahead and adjust the diffusion under scatter diffusion, and if you see as I roll this over, it's going to adjust how much the light scatters through your cloud. So as I increase this now, you can see the shaded areas aren't quite as dark. It's because the light is going in there now and scattering around a bit more, or the light's getting more diffused. It's not quite as sharp, so you can adjust this as well depending on your liking, how harsh you want those cloud shadows to look. And this is already looking pretty decent even with just a directional light. So let's go ahead and add a HDRI just so you can see this in an even better light. Okay, so I've gone ahead and connected up a sky HDRI that just has a blue underside. You can see now this is looking a lot better with the lighting, even though the render isn't fully complete. If we let that go ahead and finish, you can see the cloud looks a lot better. So I would say that if you're going to be rendering clouds, generally a sky dome light with an HDRI connected is going to be your best choice, just to create the most kind of realistic and appealing looking clouds. But yeah, you can go ahead and adjust this standard volume to your heart's content, play around with the different values to see what they do. The main ones again are going to be density, transparency, and the scatter diffusion settings like the diffusion slider here, and just see what you can create. This is a really, really easy way, as you can see, to quickly add complexity to your scenes with actual physically rendered clouds. Just remember, one last thing to bear in mind is that this volume attribute here, the higher this is, the higher quality your clouds are going to be. If I was to increase this up to something like 5, you'll probably notice that the lighting just works a little bit better within the cloud, but your render times are going to get much higher, so just be wary of that, especially if you're using multiple clouds in one scene. So I hope this has been helpful. A bit of a different tutorial today, focusing on something else in the meantime, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask and leave those in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.